Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to my channel and a slightly unusual topic for this particular video and one that I have talked about before a few times and a kind of video that actually doesn't get that many viewers. I don't mind that because, as you know, if you have followed this channel, I'm doing this as a means of self-expression. It allows me to show things I'm interested in, talk about things I'm passionate about, express things, teach things sometimes as well if I feel I have any kind of knowledge that I have a wish to share with the world, as it were. So there's different motivations behind my channel, and none of those motivations really have to do with getting a large viewership. So it doesn't bother me that so much if I make a video and hardly anyone watches it. What is nice for me to know is the video is out there. It's something I've expressed. I've created something from that expression, or need to express, or wish to express something. And if somebody finds it interesting, or learn something from it today, tomorrow, in a week, in a year, a decade from now, it's an added bonus. So it's a little piece of me for the future available online, and it's for me now to enjoy expressing myself. So what I'm talking about today a little bit is computer magazines from the 80s, which of course is the period of time that I have quite a nostalgic connection to when it comes to computers, because it was in the 80s I first got exposed to computing. We had a home computer from about 1985, I believe, roughly, which was a Tiki 100, which I'm sure is one that most of you watching this video would never have heard about, because that is a Norwegian brand home computer that got made during the home computer boom of the early 80s. And then, of course, a year after that, roughly, I bought a Commodore 64, which I'm sure that basically all my viewers would be familiar with, and many indeed of you would have had one back in the day. So, one thing that I realized recently is that a big part of my nostalgia for the 80s, or my computer nostalgia for the 80s, I should say, is directly connected not so much with the computers themselves, or even with the software or the games or the things I use the computer for, but actually with a secondary thing, which is computer magazines. Because when you read a computer magazine in the 80s, if you were in the 80s and you picked up a computer magazine, everything in it would be new and exciting. It's an unknown world. Of course, the early 80s, you had a lot of jostling for market position. You had lots of different platforms, lots of different computers that disappeared as well, as the competition was weeded down and distilled into the most popular home computers, especially for the gaming market, which is the one that I would know most about because I had a Commodore 64. So, and of course, it's a little bit different for the office and business market, which of course were catered for by different magazines than the ones I read. So I feel sometimes that I actually have a stronger nostalgia for the magazines than I do for actually using the hardware, or for, of course, these days using an emulator to say play a game on the Commodore 64, which I find quite enjoyable. But a lot of my time, which was spent to do with computing back in the 80s, was reading computer magazines. So I discovered, because we did have a magazine for the Tiki 100, it was called the Tiki magazine, Tiki Bladet, of course, in Norwegian. And But when I discovered computer and video games, C plus VG, it says on the logo, in December 1996, I believe that was, I'll double check that at some point, when it had a really captivating cover, because that is when you had the cover, which was the picture of David Bowie from the movie Labyrinth, and it was just something about that cover that really stood out and caught my eye. I bought the magazine and I was quite fascinated by it. I even remember there was one morning at the time we were actually visiting someone in a different city, and I actually hadn't seen this magazine before, and it took me a while to find out where they sold it in my home city, because it's a magazine they didn't carry everywhere. So just a few places I knew where to find it. So one morning I actually woke up at 6 in the morning, which was probably 3 hours before I normally would wake up, and I couldn't sleep. And I took the magazine and I sat in the staircase leading down to the kitchen from the upstairs where we were sleeping, and I was reading the magazine. So very fond memories of my first experience with a computer magazine from the 80s. And I'm going to say more about, of course, the particular magazines I read, the Commodore and Computer and Video Games, C plus VG. Commodore User was another one. I also read some Compute Gazette, although that was a magazine that in itself was a bit dull, but it did have some amazing program listings. And then when I started rebuying my old magazines from back in the 80s, and I came across some other magazines that I actually quite liked that weren't on my radar at all back in the 80s. I'm not sure they even were sold in my local newsstands, like Your Computer, for instance, and a few others. And so it's quite interesting to get back into this now. And also when you read the magazines now and seeing it from the perspective of 2024, something that was from about 40 years ago, sometimes more than 40 years, it's very interesting to look at things that you may have just ignored back in those days, like the adverts, for instance. Because the adverts now, things you take for granted, that these are the kinds of things that are advertised. And what is exciting and amazing about something in those days is, of course, something that we might take for granted now, or that has changed so much that it's obsolete. And so it has a certain historical kind of significance, as well as a stage the world had to go through in terms of technological evolution and development to get to where it was. Now, I'm actually digressing now, because the thing that I really wanted to talk about today is a very particular magazine that I hadn't heard about before, but that I would have absolutely adored to have in my possession back in the 80s. This is one that was published between 1984 and 1985. It wasn't meant to be a long-running magazine. It actually is a kind of a book, or a series of books published in magazine form, and it forms a complete course in programming the main platforms of computers of the day that people might have at home. Your home micros, as you might say in the UK. This was also published in the UK, and it's called Input magazine. I'm gonna right now, of course, one of the things you may have, I'm just going to digress a little bit more, and I know that some of you find this a bit distracting, but others quite enjoy my digressions, because in the end it is also about expressing myself and just talking to you guys listening to this. So you may have noticed, if you have watched any of my videos before now, that there are some lovely new IKEA bookshelves over there on this side, and getting more bookshelves into my office, as I call it, my room, has allowed me to organize things in a better way than I had before. And one thing about computer magazines, once you have a collection of more than a few, is it's hard to store them in a way that keeps them protected. These are 40-year-old magazines. Many of them are quite fragile. The covers can be a little bit loose, things like that. And so rearranging my books, making space for more books, has allowed me to get these lovely binders that I now use for my magazines. And also I just made some labels for them, which you can't really see that well. I made it in typewriter because that is more fun. And that's, of course, it allows me to leaf through them, look at them, etc., while keeping them relatively safe from falling apart more than they already have, which is one of the things. I don't have my original magazines from the 80s, but I have been able to replace quite a bit of my original collection thanks to eBay. And I've also added new things that I didn't even know existed back in the day, and this is one of them. So I'm going to just change my view now to my desk so I can show you this properly, because this is a magazine called Input. And it is, as it says here, Marshall Cavendish Computer Course in Weekly Parts. So this was intended right away to be published over in 52 issues over 2 years. And the first issue was a double one. It came part 1 and part 2 would have come together, probably in a plastic sleeve or something like that. And also it came with official binders as well. I think 3 binders originally. I got room for all of them now in 2 binders. So I got part 1 there and I got part 2 here. And this is an amazing set of magazines, and I really would have loved this back in the day. Of course, you got the official binder here. You can see the picture there. Of course, at the time these were published, a few things would have stood in my way of actually enjoying these. First of all, 1984, when they started publishing these, I'd only just started learning English in school, so I wouldn't have understood everything here. It did boost my learning of English to be exposed to computers, however. Of course, our first computer, the Tiki 100, was Norwegian. You did have some Norwegian software, but once you got into the operating system, which was a CPM clone, you would be using English language commands. You would be writing your basic programs in what would have been an early form of Microsoft Basic. Which also was in English, etc., etc. Your public domain sort of software that you were able to actually send out disks for and get back were programs made in English. So we got all that in sort of a 1985 to 86, which means that I had learned enough English to actually get by and to use whatever exposure I got to English through the computer to boost my learning of the language. And when I started reading computer magazines in December 1986, I'd had English in school for almost 2.5 years. And again, trying to read this magazine in English, it meant, of course, that I didn't pick up everything. I would have missed a lot of the word plays because these were British magazines, and of course word plays abound everywhere, the headlines, what have you. So of course reading them now is quite a different experience too, because I actually know so much more English. So this Input magazine is a computer course, it says, because a lot of it has to do with programming in BASIC primarily, and it is made to accommodate the Spectrum, the Commodore 64, Hakon BBC, Dragon 32, ZX81, it says here. I don't know how that's different from Spectrum, by the way, but I'll try to figure that out. VIC-20 and Tandy TRS-80. So, and these symbols are used throughout to indicate the differences in what you type in to create the different to accommodate the differences in the language, the basic language used in these different computers. But of course, all the major things, all the principles are exactly the same. It's just sometimes the details of how it is typed in will vary somewhat. And of course, back in these days, line numbers still a thing. Of course, these days, if you want to program BASIC, which you still can, you don't have to use line numbers. You can, but you don't have to. It's much better practice to use labels, for instance. labels and subroutines is the way to go. So this, I just thought I'd show you this because I think this is a really cool set of magazines that may have flown under people's radars. And also, by the way, despite being 40 years old now, these were printed on very good quality paper. It's quite a bit thicker than the normal magazines you got in the newsstand. The covers are thicker as well, which means that these ones are built to last, because these were not intended to be bought and discarded like your weekly or monthly magazines generally were. They weren't printed to be cheap and cheerful and read and discard. They were meant to be kept in their folders, read, reread, referenced, etc. for years and years. And so they are of quite a different quality than what many other magazines are and were. So that is quite an interesting thing, I think, from the 80s that I did miss. And if you are interested in these magazines, I will make more videos about them. This was really meant to be an introduction to them, where I'll talk more about the actual contents of them. You still get lots of people selling these on eBay, and you want to look out for a full set, because if you don't get a full set, you might find it hard to find partial sets that actually match up into a full set. But you will have people selling full sets, and generally speaking, they aren't that expensive. Most of the listings I've seen, they would have you pay less than £1 per magazine for the whole set, so less than £50 for the whole set, which is, I think, very reasonable for the amount of content you get. And it looks very well structured, this particular course. I'll just swap back here now to so whoever made this, I can't remember his name again now, Marshall Cavendish Limited, let's see, is that the name of the guy? Marshall Cavendish, yeah, I don't know if that's the actual name or just the publisher. In any case, it's very structured in trying to teach you how to code with examples. You're getting full programs every single issue, and of course sometimes it's a little bit ineffable and inscrutable when, of course, you use things like your poke and peek commands in Commodore 64, which means you are addressing a byte or a bit in your, or byte usually, in the memory directly, without actually where, of course, then you have to explain to the reader exactly what that thing does, as opposed to going via sort of a high-level interpreter like BASIC. So very, very interesting stuff. And it also comes with a bit of the ephemera that originally would have been part of these as well. So this is something that I would recommend, I think, to anyone who wants to get into basic programming in 2024. Now, it's not too late to program BASIC. BBC Basic is still maintained as a very good quality basic interpreter. It is very fast. It doesn't actually need to be compiled before running programs, unlike some other basic interpreters that you get. You can still program in Commodore Basic, in your Commodore 64 emulators. There are also programming environments that allow you to do it without being in the emulator itself, so an actual proper programming environment. Excuse me, that's my phone call. Hello? Right. Yeah, sorry about that. Just a scam call there coming in. Yes, so there are ways to program in BASIC these days. So yeah, so for anyone interested in that, this is quite useful and quite fun as well to look at these old things. And of course, one of the nice things too is the way it's made. It's very colorful. It's vibrant, and it's very nice. So yeah, so it's something that I would recommend for anyone who's really interested in both your 80s computer nostalgia as well as other things. So yeah, sorry, but the phone call really distracted me because yeah, it was a scam call about a car accident. So yeah, I'm just I was trying to sort of see if I could sort of scam bait a little bit just to see how much information they were trying to provide. But basically, it was just about the accident that happened that I reported within the last 12 months. They weren't able to be more specific than that. I was just asking them about when did it happen, etc., etc. Of course, I never reported anything the last 12 months, but anyway, right. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found that a little bit interesting, and I will show you more about these some other time. And also, of course, I got other magazines that I want to show you. And of course, when it comes to the computer and video games magazines, Commodore User, things like that, I'm going to do videos like I have done before, where I just go through them and read through them and read out stuff, point out interesting things, talk about my memories of it, and generally just have a look at them for a bit of nostalgia and have a bit of a chat, I suppose, with you about them. So thanks for watching, and you know what to do if you want to support my channel. It's like, share, comment, subscribe, join me on Patreon, buy my books, got my poetry books back here, buy my music, my art on pixels.com. There's music on Bandcamp. There's all kinds of stuff. And of course, these days I'm also doing a bit of decluttering. So I am selling stuff regularly on eBay now. It may not be anything you're interested in, but it's mostly books actually. As you see, I do have a lot of books, and technically I have too many books. So some of them are going on eBay. And of course, anyone buying something on eBay is in a way supporting what I'm doing creatively as well. So all the links in the description. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.